Dr. Phil talks truth to stupid on The View, and we'll give you all the highlights. Plus, Joe Biden wants to prove that he can stay up late with the cool kids, but instead he saw Seth Meyers, and, well, he's not the cool kid, and it didn't work out too well for him. Plus, Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears of Virginia might very well be our favorite politician of the day. We'll tell you all about what she did. You're going to love it. It's time now. I'm Larry O'Connor. Call me Larry. You ever like get to a point where you want to say something? It's time now, and then you decide, no, I don't want to say that. So I didn't. Instead, I just said, I'm Larry O'Connor. You can call me Larry. See, I thought if I did it again, they might bring in the title sequence again, but they didn't. Hey, thanks for watching. We're live and rumbling away on Rumble. Thanks for being a part of the live program as we stream here every single day, noon Eastern. Make sure you like, subscribe, forward, share, and all that jazz, and leave comments. We do like your comments at Rumble, at YouTube, wherever you're watching us, frankly. And if you like the audio of our podcast and can't always catch the video, make sure you subscribe on all your favorite podcast platforms. All right, let's get right to it. Dr. Phil appeared on The View, and it was cathartic to see somebody on that panel actually telling these women something that they probably have never heard before, and that includes the audience. And understand, Dr. Phil got there because they thought they were going to get Oprah's favorite doctor, Dr. Phil, you know, the person who's all touchy-feely on his talk show, and he feels your pain and wants to empathize. And instead, well, they got the red-pilled Dr. Phil.
So you say you're not the only voice in your kids' ears, so you have to be the best voice. Mm-hmm. Explain that.
Well, think about it. In like 08, 09, smartphones came on, and kids stopped living their lives and started watching people live their lives. And so we saw the biggest spike and the highest levels of depression, anxiety, loneliness, and suicidality since records have ever been kept. And
now, I just need to pause here because a pivot is about to happen, because you probably want to say, well, what's so red-pilled about that? That's some pretty normal parenting advice, right? Too much screen time, too much time on devices, too much time spending on social media instead of actual social life, right? And you're right. And you'll see all of the women on The View platform there. They're all like, oh, yes. Oh, we 100% agree. Oh, these are things that our suburban moms care about. So I'm going to act like I know what you're talking about. Like Whoopi Goldberg knows anything about raising children in this era, or Joy Behar for that matter. What do you mean social media? You mean the wireless radio? You don't want them listening to the old Ozzie and Harriet show on the wireless? You know, please, they don't know, but that they nod along. And it's like, oh, yes. Oh, thank you, Dr. Phil. Thank you. And now watch what happens.
And it's just continued on and on and on. And then COVID hits 10 years later, and the same agencies that knew that are the agencies that shut down the schools for 2 years. Who does that? Who takes away the support system for these children? Who takes them away and shuts it down? And by the way, when they shut it down, they stopped the mandated reporters from being able to see children that were being abused and sexually molested, and in fact sent them home and abandoned them to their abusers with no way to watch, and referrals dropped 50 to 60%. So
there was also a pandemic going on, and they were trying to save
kids' lives. Remember, we know a lot of folks who died during this. So it wasn't, people weren't laying around eating bond, but, well, you know what? We're lucky. Maybe we're lucky they didn't, because.
All right. So a couple of things here. First of all, understand what Sunny Hostin and Whoopi Goldberg just did there, right? He says, look, the children got addicted to these screens. It was already bad for their social anxiety. We already knew that. And then we forced them to stay home, and they stay on the screens. That exacerbated it. Plus, the teachers and the administrators at schools, who are the people who are supposed to be the first reporters if they see signs of abuse or molestation, they didn't see these kids anymore. And so those kids were back home and exposed to those people who were abusing them. And Sunny Hostin and Whoopi Goldberg said, yeah, we get all that. Never disputed the facts. Never disputed the fact that children were harmed, possibly irrevocably, during those 2 years. Didn't dispute it, just rationalized it by saying, well, it was a pandemic. We had to save people's lives. That's incredibly revealing, that they don't even they're not even trying to dispute the fact that children were harmed. They just think it's okay that children got harmed because we had to save people's lives in the pandemic. That's number one. Number two, do you see what Whoopi Goldberg is doing here? Whoopi Goldberg is saying, well, we had to save lives. We knew people who died. And Dr. Phil says, not kids, not children. And she immediately starts to pivot and say, well, children didn't die because we kept them home. We got lucky there with the kids. It's a good thing they were home, otherwise they would have died. Rejecting all of the science that we know about this virus, that they didn't have a better mortality rate during COVID because they happened to be home. They were still interacting with adults. They were interacting with their parents. They still caught COVID. The science is not that they survived better because they were home. The science is that the virus was not as hard on young people, on young bodies. It's absolute insanity. But she's trying to rationalize it to the nth degree because she can't stand the fact that someone is sitting there actually calling them on what they did to kids. And watch how this develops now. Suddenly, Dr. Phil becomes the bad guy.
We kept them out of the places that they could be sick because no one wanted to believe we had an issue.
Are you saying no school children died of COVID?
I'm saying it was the safest group. They were the less vulnerable group, and they suffered and will suffer more from the mismanagement of COVID than they will from the exposure to COVID. And that's not an opinion, that's a fact.
Well, Phil, we don't even have time to talk it out now, man. But
wow, that's absolutely huge. And again, something that those people on the panel never heard. Did you see Anna Navarro, how contemptuous she was? Are you telling me children didn't die during COVID? By the way, the number of children who died of COVID without any other comorbidity is so infinitesimal. It's not even funny. Yes, there were a couple of deaths of people under the age of 17, but they also had a ton of other stuff going on. Look at the numbers, look at the stats. And that's not just me saying it. The CDC even admits this now. Anthony Fauci admits this now. Everybody admits that it was wrong to shut down schools, except these people, because no one has actually said this on the panel and in front of that audience, not just the live audience who heard them applaud, but also the television audience. And let me explain why no one has ever said that on the panel. Not because they're not courageous, not because they have been censored. No, it's because they never invite anyone who might say something like that. They didn't know Dr. Phil was going to say this. They thought they were getting Oprah's doctor. And instead they got red pill Dr. Phil. And by the way, we're just scratching the surface here. He also brought up immigration and the border. Just wait.
My understanding is that you went to the southern border. Now you're saying that you're going to give people facts. What did you take away from that experience, and what kind of reporting are you going to be bringing back from that experience?
I'll tell you a fact I took away. I talked to the head of all the border guards down there, the head of the union. I asked him straight up, kids are coming over the border with numbers written on them, phone numbers and addresses. Mm-hmm. Do we check those out? He said, well, we call them. Is it possible that we're sending them into known prostitution rings or sweatshops? He said, it's not possible. It is absolute. We are using American tax dollars to ship children into known prostitution
All
and
children
sweatshops.
Or some children.
Well, who knows?
This is amazing because they're so angry that this is being communicated by someone of authority who they can't just dismiss as a crazy MAGA right-winger, although give it about a day, and that's what they'll start calling Dr. Phil. But Sunny Hostin even has to interject here and say, oh, sure. We're using American tax dollars to send children into child prostitution rings and slave labor situations, but it's not all of them, right? As if there's an acceptable amount of children that our tax dollars are actually sending to child prostitution rings. But this is what happens when you're on the left and you're in the media and you at all costs have to protect the regime, the Biden administration, or even more importantly, do at all costs everything you can to prevent Donald Trump and his politics from actually having a fair say. And so you reach the point when you're Sunny Hostin and you're on live national television saying, well, I mean, let's just put this in perspective. Sure, some kids are being sent into child prostitution rings with our tax dollars, but it's not every single one of them. because apparently there's an acceptable number. And Phil calls her out on it. There's more.
Okay.
We don't know. I said, are you?
So what kind of checking do they do? So
They
'cause you
call the
said-
number and say, do you know about this child? They say, yes. Will you receive them when they come? Yes. I said, is it possible that that's a prostitution ring? He said, we know enough to know that in a number of cases, it has turned out to be absolute sex ring. It has turned out to be an absolute sweatshop. I said, how is this possible?
Well, what do they
And he
do
said,
then?
it is happening.
What do they do then if they know that that's happening? Where is the U.S. Attorney's Office? Where's the?
Here's the
good
thing.
question,
You
isn't
have to re-ask that question when we come back.
Okay.
Yeah, time for a break on that one because Sonny Hostin was so close. You're so close, Sonny. Come on, just put down your blinders. Set aside your political ideology because, yeah, that's what a lot of us have been screaming about for years now since we saw Biden's disaster on the border. We've been screaming. Remember the movie Cry of Freedom, which talked about the sex trafficking rings that were down there? Remember how they said that was a right-wing conspiracy theory linked to QAnon? I mean, if I were there in Dr. Phil's position and she said, where's the U.S. attorney? I would have turned to her and say, I'm sorry, Sonny, you're not allowed to ask that question unless you're a right-wing QAnon conspiracy theorist. Because apparently recognizing the fact that children are being put in the worst possible circumstances because of this president's border disaster makes you a conspiracy theorist. And it's amazing how quickly they all have to jump to commercial on this show every time Dr. Phil goes there. But Dr. Phil had a very busy day. It wasn't just The View that he stopped at. You remember how I said in about a day they're going to start calling him a right-wing MAGA hat-wearing conspiracy theorist? Yeah, well, his evening activity last night will definitely seal the deal because he showed up on Fox News Channel.
Well, I think people are afraid to take a position on this because if they take a position and say we should control the border, then they're labeled as anti-immigration. They're labeled as haters for these different countries that people are coming from. But that's missing the point, isn't it? Because we're not talking about immigration. We're talking about illegal immigration.
Right.
I'm very pro-immigration.
So am I.
We need immigrants in this country. We got a 1.6 birth rate. We need 2.1 to sustain our infrastructure here. I welcome immigrants into this country, but we need to know who they are, don't we? We need to know who it is that's coming into our country. We need to be able to sort through these people and those that are enemies of the United States that are coming into the country, those that are on the terror watch list coming into the country. Those people certainly need to be filtered and stopped. And when you come into the United States illegally, that's a felony. But I love this country, and we need to all stand up for this country and stop apologizing for this country, stop apologizing for having rules and guidelines, stop apologizing for having a border that's not a turnstile. I've been to the border. I've just been there one time. I'm not saying I'm a border expert. I'm certainly not a politician, but I've talked to the border agents down there. These are dedicated men and women, Jesse. They are. And they are so frustrated that they're not allowed to do their job. They wanted to guard the border, they want to patrol the border, and they've become social workers.
Let me just say, he's been to the border as many times as President Biden has, and he's spent longer time there, and he's talked to more people. Biden will be going there this Thursday, and so will Donald Trump on the very same day. That should be interesting. One more Dr. Phil, as if this wasn't enough.
We've got these fringe factions that are trying to rewrite history, rewrite science, rewrite biology, just pretend that facts aren't facts because they don't want them to be. But you know what? They are. And we've got facts that have been there for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and you can't just change them because you don't want them to be the truth. The fact of the matter is that we had a pandemic here. Children were not very vulnerable to that. Now, we want to protect everyone, right? But children were not very vulnerable to that. But what they were vulnerable to was disrupting their lives. We know that we had the highest levels of anxiety, depression, and loneliness, as well as suicidal ideation and suicidal attempts, then that in 08 and 09, that we've seen since they started keeping records. That just continued to build, and then COVID hit, which caused it to spike. COVID didn't cause it. It started back in 08 and 09, and it kind of correlated with the smartphone dropping, where kids stopped living their own lives and started watching others live their lives. But they knew that when they shut the schools down. You pull out the support system, and as well as pulling out the support system, when you pull out the support system, you disrupt their educational development, their social development, their emotional development, and you also take children that have been subject to emotional abuse and sexual molestation, and you take them away from the mandated reporters who can keep an eye on them, and referrals to Department of Child and Family Services dropped 40, 50, 60% across the nation. What did we do? We sent them home and locked them up with their abusers, so nobody could watch them. And what did they say when they shut the schools down? They said, well, we're doing the best we can with what we know. No, you're not. You knew better, and you knew it at the time, and you didn't have a plan to reopen those schools, and now those kids are suffering. Will they ever close the gap? Who knows?
Let me tell you something. If a parent went to a school board meeting a year and a half or 2 years ago and said to their elected officials, the people who work for those parents in their local school system, exactly what Dr. Phil just said on Jesse Waters' show, the Biden administration would have had the FBI investigating that parent as a domestic terrorist. You and I, we've known this. We've been saying it. It's hard to find anyone with authority who is allowed to go on television and say it along with us. And you heard in his diatribe there about the border and about how, hey, I like legal immigration, but what we're talking about here is illegal immigration. For some reason, we can't say that. Otherwise, people label you as illegal. Remember when you just said that? Yeah, Dr. Phil, you're close there, but you got to take it one step further. It's not that they label you illegal immigrant. It's that they label you a MAGA fascist, a xenophobic, racist, anti-immigrant, MAGA fascist. The problem now is not that you're right about the issue and you just agree to disagree with your political opponent. No, you have to be demonized, canceled, and completely removed from society if anything you say happens to line up with something that Donald Trump is promoting and proposing as a political policy. That's where we are, Phil. I just want to let you know because you're about 5 seconds away from being canceled. You better check in with Oprah. Let me just say, it's the Lenten season. We're getting up on Easter. Everybody's sort of renewing their spiritual lives and their faith. And if you're doing that as well, you might be reading scripture. And, for centuries now, really millennia, Christians have been trying to properly interpret the book of Revelation, often called the Apocalypse, right? The final book of Scripture, the final book of the Bible written by John the Evangelist. And of course, it's written in Old Hebrew apocalyptic literature form, but it says through that incredibly extravagant literary style, it says what we should expect at the end of the world. And I could be wrong, but I think that there are certain interpretations out there that suggest that one of the signs of the coming of the end of the world, the second coming of Jesus Christ, the actual apocalyptic end of our existence here before the final judgment, one of those signs, if you interpret it correctly, is Dr. Phil getting red-pilled. Food for thought. Yesterday morning, the news broke that Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel was calling it quits at the Republican National Committee. This, of course, just a year after she fought tooth and nail to retain that job for a 2-year term, but she's cutting it short. Here's how Fox and Friends reported the big story.
Fox News alert reports coming in this morning that apparently RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel will be stepping down from her position.
All right, McDaniel's shocking decision doesn't come as a complete surprise, but GOP presidential hopefuls turn their focus to Michigan, that's her hometown, ahead of tomorrow's primaries.
Madeline Rivera is in D.C. and joins us now with all the details. Good morning to you, Madeline. Good morning, guys. Ronna McDaniel calling it an honor and privilege to serve as RNC chairwoman for 7 years. She says the RNC has historically undergone change once we have a nominee, and it has always been my intention to honor that tradition. I remain committed to winning back the White House and electing Republicans up and down the ballot in November. McDaniel's decision to step down March 8th, as reported by the New York Times, was expected. Trump had said he would be urging changes at the RNC after the South Carolina presidential primary. Former President Trump is endorsing the chairman of the North Carolina GOP, Michael Whatley, to take over the role, and he's backing his daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, for RNC co-chair.
Obviously, I've been talking about Ronna McDaniel, but it looks like the straw that broke the camel's back was the reporting done by Jennifer Van Laar. Apparently, there was $3.1 million in private jet services since 2017, $1.3 million in limousine and chauffeur services, $17.1 million in donor mementos, and all of this is fine typically if you're winning. Because the RNC has not been winning, then they really started to look at these financial documents. And from what I'm hearing, the former president was not too happy when the report came out. He was loyal to her, but he said it's time for her to go.
Well, the former president and a lot of his allies were trying to squeeze her out. She has faced an intense pressure campaign, and we have talked in the past about how Trump had repeatedly pressured Ronna to cancel the primary debates because he wasn't going to be in them, and reportedly the primaries themselves. And she resisted. She said, look, I don't have the authority to cancel the actual primaries.
That last part, I'm not quite sure has any bearing here. Trump wasn't losing faith in Ronna McDaniel because she wasn't canceling primaries. Come on, guys. It was what Lawrence Jones said. It was the reporting of Jennifer Van Laar at redstate.com. You know that because you watch this program, and we talked to Jen right here about 2 weeks ago when the story broke about the spending at the RNC, and she joins us now. I guess we're going to have to change your business card, Jen. Instead of managing editor at Red State, it's Jen Van Laar, the straw that broke the camel's back. Well done.
I feel like that's happened a few times in my life.
Fair enough.
Professionally and personally.
But this reporting obviously found its way right onto the smartphone or device of the former president, Donald Trump, and he didn't like what he saw. This whole idea that Ronna McDaniel always planned on stepping down at this time. Does your reporting bear that out? Because I don't remember her saying that ever.
No, my reporting does not bear that out. When Ronna was reelected in January of 2023, part of the reason that she was saying to the delegates that she needed to be reelected was because, hey, we have this election coming up in 2024, and we don't need to change horses midstream. We need to have this consistency for fundraising, all of that kind of thing. And even when we started looking into the latest expenditures that I talked with you about a few weeks ago, she and her people were saying, we're just focused on winning back the presidency, on taking back the Senate. And there was nothing like, oh, as soon as we get a nominee, that nominee is going to choose their chair. The nominee normally chooses the chair if they win. And then the next January, they install their chair.
I am shocked to learn that a politician in D.C. is lying to try to save face here on this one. Obviously, she wasn't planning on stepping down. And listen, this isn't like a victory lap to say, ha, we got someone fired, because we want, frankly, a strong Republican Party. We approach our journalism every day with a perspective and a point of view. The problem is your reporting revealed some very serious systemic problems here at the top of the RNC.
Exactly. And I'm not trying to take down the Republican Party in any way. I'm trying to make it stronger. And that's why my investigative reporting not only reflects on the corruption among Democrats, but when I see things that are going wrong on the Republican side, things that are going to cost us elections now and in the future, then I want to shine a light on that and try to get it changed. A strong RNC is what we need, because the national parties can do things that PACs can't do, that state parties can't do, the way that they can coordinate and that they can have data that they can share with the state parties and with local parties. We need all of that strong, and we need it brought up to current technological standards. And we need people who are good at what they do and not cronies. And so that's what I'm trying to accomplish with my reporting.
And like I said, it's very frustrating considering a year ago we were having this knockdown, drag-out fight for her reelection. It was unprecedented to run for a fourth term. No one has ever done that before. She insisted on running for a fourth term. She was challenged by Harmeet Dillon, a very viable challenge, especially considering basically everyone who was voting the state chairs had been basically handpicked and put in place by Ronna Romney McDaniel. It's sort of like the College of Cardinals, you know, doing a vote for the Pope, while the Pope was the one who put him in place. So it's a little frustrating considering she only lasted a year when she fought so hard to keep the job a year ago.
Right. And that whole year, she was having difficulty raising funds. And then obviously had some pretty bad off-year election results. And then you had that conversation with her after the Miami debate where she kind of said, like, well, we didn't have anything to do with the losses in Virginia. We're not responsible for that. They didn't ask us for money. And that they had told her that they didn't need it when that wasn't really the case. So I think that all of that, in addition to my reporting, just was a terrible year for her, and she really did need to go.
I think you're right. Yeah, and the other real red flag that came from that conversation, the debate in Miami that was co-sponsored by Salem Media, was that it seemed like she was blaming Glenn Youngkin. You know, that this is a pattern of behavior here. It's like, we had nothing to do with it. That's not our job. It's those guys' fault, which is the last thing you want as the head of an organization. And frankly, I think all of this must have added up for someone like Donald Trump, who is used to hiring and firing people to run major organizations. You add to that your reporting about how money is being spent right now, and the change had to come.
Absolutely. And in that conversation with you, she kind of put out some misinformation because she's blaming Glenn Youngkin saying that they didn't need her. Well, Youngkin is not the chair of the Virginia Republican Party. He's the governor, but there's a different chair. And she knows that very well because the chair of the Virginia Republican Party would be one of those 168 RNC members who elects her. So she understands very well all of that. And she's putting confusion in the minds of people who don't pay attention to politics by that comment.
Yeah. And I interviewed Rich Anderson, the chair of the Republican Party of Virginia, and he said, I don't know anything about this. In fact, I was asking for money and help from the RNC years ago. So kind of a 1-2 punch here, actually, Jen, although honestly, you did all the hard work there at Red State here at the final analysis. And I want to talk about the journalism aspect of this because it's not like, and listen, you have great sources and you do get tips from all over the place. People would be surprised. I'm sure I would be surprised if you ever told me some of the sources you've got. But this is actually public information. You did the hard work of going through these forms and figuring out what was there and what wasn't there and where the money was spent. Other journalists could have done this. Other right-of-center conservative journalists could have done this, but they didn't. They didn't go there. You did.
Right. I mean, it took lots of hours to do it. It was all public as far as the transactions themselves. It was helpful to speak with sources that I had who were donors or members of the 168 or contractors with the RNC to, you know, run things past and get some context for things, which is a word they all like. But yes, it was me spending the hours putting it together, painstakingly getting the receipts, watermarking them so people don't steal them. But, you know, I want to give a shout out to our VIP members because it's their generosity with supporting good journalism. I guess I shouldn't even say generosity, their investment in us, in good journalism that makes this possible for us to do it, because it was just on ad revenue. There's no way that I would have the time to be able to go put all that together. So I really want to thank our VIP members and hope that any people watching who are not VIP members already will realize how much we need their investment in what we do.
Well, you're right. And in fact, to that end, I'm going to jump in here and promote my VIP code, even though you did all the work.
No, I don't care as long as we get people.
Go to the townhall.com VIP portal and just enter the code Larry, and you'll actually get 50% off right now if you use the code word Larry. And I want to echo what you're saying here because, listen, it's great to hear Lawrence Jones there on Fox and Friends, you know, millions and millions of viewers watching this story as it breaks. And he says the straw that broke the camel back was the reporting. You're reporting at redstate.com. And you hear it from people all the time, consumers of news and media and information. Where are the investigative journalists? Where are they out there? The last time investigative journalists got rewarded in Washington, D.C., it was for regurgitating the Russian collusion lie. They actually won awards, and that story was false. And here you are. You want to know where the investigative journalists are? They're here. You're looking at her, Jennifer Van Laar, but she can only do it with the support of VIP members. This kind of journalism, frankly, only works when the consumers of the information are subscribing and supporting what we do.
Absolutely. And we're under attack like never before. You know this. You talk about it, I'm sure, all the time. And it's just vital that we show with our wallets what we value.
Yeah. And by the way, I'll say it because you don't want to. Well, no, you wouldn't mind ticking off some of our friends as well. There's a lot of conservative websites out there with a lot of conservative reporters that write a lot of posts from the right of center perspective. They didn't go after this story. For whatever reason, you can ask them, you can talk to them, but I'll tell you, when you're in this world, when you're in the right of center media world and you start ticking off the chair of the RNC, that's not the most popular thing to do. But Jen, you did it because it was an important story to tell.
Right. And that could be maybe some started looking at things and they faced the same gaslighting that I did from Ronda's spokespeople or people going around and spreading rumors about them that they're bought and paid for by I don't know who, because it's not going to be the left or the right in this case. So
I
that's
assure
probably
you,
what they were facing.
The deeper pockets in this story are the ones that we just sort of went after.
Right. And so they have all of those resources to try to crush journalists who try to go after them. And that's what they've tried to do with me. They didn't realize how stubborn I am.
Well, and the other thing that may have happened at those other places is that an executive may have sort of picked up the phone and said, listen, I know you're working on this story, but we're not in a place where we can tick these people off right now. So let's look at another story. That happens, guys. It does.
Oh, yes, it happens. And I'm grateful here. I mean, there's stories I've been working on in LA. I've heard from journalists there that they want to run with things and their bosses won't let them. So, it's a whole structure here at Town Hall Media we have where we follow good journalism where it leads.
All right, enough of the victory lap. I don't want you to hurt yourself, patting yourself on the back. Go after the LA County supervisors, that Barbara Ferrer woman, that ghoul who's in charge of public health. Let's take care of her next.
She's on the list, right up there.
Thank you, Jennifer. Great job. Great work, as always, at redstate.com. So proud to be a part of the family here. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you.
Hey, guys, imagine being a committed leftist, committed to the cause. I mean, the most righteous cause you can think of. And you're so committed that you make a public display of setting yourself on fire on behalf of the cause. And it turns out posthumously, you're watching things transpire as everybody talks about you killing yourself by self-immolation. And my guess is you're watching everything transpire from your own sort of fiery pit for eternity. And as you watch people talk about your great martyrdom, it's discovered that you're still not quite woke enough. That's where we are right now. Here, take a look.
Authorities identified Aaron Bushnell as the person who, on Sunday, set himself on fire. The 25-year-old was an active duty member of the U.S. Air Force. CNN's Gabe Cohen joins us now with the details. And Gabe, this is something that he did in protest.
Yeah, that's correct. And we're learning much more about this 25-year-old active duty airman, Aaron Bushnell, as you mentioned. He's from San Antonio, Texas, and he live streamed his actions on Sunday in broad daylight on the streets of D.C. outside the Israeli embassy. We are not going to show that video. It is extremely graphic and disturbing. I have watched the video. I can tell you at the beginning, at the start of it, you can see Bushnell walking up to the embassy on the street in his military fatigues. He's speaking calmly to the camera. I want to read a portion of what he says. He said, quote, "I will no longer be complicit in genocide. I'm about to engage in an extreme act of protest, but compared to what people have been experiencing in Palestine at the hands of their colonizers, it is not extreme at all. This is what our ruling class has decided will be normal." He then goes on.
Can I'm going to let you finish there, CNN, but why are we doing this? Right. This is clearly an emotionally disturbed maniac who did this to himself, right? For his cause, his righteous, woke, leftist, Democrat cause. And let's say the only difference between this guy and a terrorist is he didn't take anybody else with him, right? But he's tantamount to a suicide bomber, except the bomb was just on himself. And now we're reading his manifesto on CNN. And why? I assure you, if his manifesto was for, let's say, a conservative cause, let's say to protect the unborn, right? or some other, or maybe in protest over the border situation. I don't know. I can't think of it because conservatives very rarely do this sort of thing. But if this were a conservative cause, do you think they'd be reading to you what his manifesto, what his dying words were, what his big lofty cause was? Of course not. Why are we doing this? Well, we're doing this because this reporter and the producers at CNN, they're lionizing him. They're making a martyr out of him. They agree with him. All right, let's finish.
To pour some sort of accelerant, it looks like, on his head out of a water bottle he was carrying. And then he lights himself on fire, Boris. And as the flames engulf him, you can hear him yelling, free Palestine, again and again, until finally he collapses. And that is when officers, you can see them race in, one of them with a fire extinguisher in their hands, trying to put out the flames. But it takes time. And as we have learned, Bushnell died in the hospital at some point later on. And look, it really speaks to the tensions that are continuing to escalate around the war in Gaza, not just across the world, but here in the United States. We saw a similar incident in December when someone self-immolated, lit themselves on fire outside of the Israeli consulate in Atlanta. But this feels different. This is an active duty member of the military burning himself to death on the streets of the nation's capital.
This speaks to the tensions and the rising fight about Israel and Palestine. No, it doesn't. It speaks to a deranged, mentally disturbed individual who had no business being an active duty member of the military. Hey, remember when Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and General Milley made a great show at the beginning of the Biden administration? They made a great show about how they were trying to remove all the extremists from the military. We have a problem in the U.S. military. We got a bunch of extremists, and we got to get rid of them. How did this guy slip through the cracks? This guy seems pretty extreme. You know how he slipped through the cracks? He wasn't the kind of extremist they care about. He wasn't the kind of extremist they were looking for. He wasn't conservative, you see. He didn't vote for Trump. Those are the extremists we can't abide here. So listen, a few moments ago, I compared this guy to a terrorist, and I'm recognizing that a lot of you might, Larry, you've gone too far. You've gone too far, sir. This guy, you shouldn't compare him to a terrorist. He's just a mentally disturbed individual, and he set himself on fire for a political cause, but that doesn't make him a terrorist. And you know what? Okay, fine. I love your feedback. We read the comments all the time. I understand you may be there. So let's not go out on that limb. I'm no expert in terrorism. Let's turn to an expert in terrorism and find out what they think. Here's a statement from Hamas. That's right. The terrorist organization Hamas that just carried out the October 7th massacre that started this renewed call for freeing Palestine because, we must reward the terrorists with what they want. A two-state solution, free Palestine from the river to the sea. This guy set himself on fire on behalf of Hamas because he wants to give Hamas terrorists what they want. And so, of course, Hamas put out a statement celebrating him. We in the Islamic resistance movement express our deepest condolences and our full solidarity with the family and friends of the American pilot Aaron Bushnell, whose name has been immortalized as a defender of human values and the oppression of the Palestinian people. It's just too bad he had to wear the uniform of the great Satan. Allahu Akbar! This is disgusting. This is despicable. Of course he's a terrorist. He's being celebrated by terrorists because he has common cause with them. And he did the kind of thing that they would do. I'm not going to read the whole statement because it's propaganda from terrorists. I'm not like CNN. I won't do that. But I have no doubt that somewhere at the end, the Hamas experts back at the mothership may have said, next time if any other Americans want to do this sort of thing, you might want to think about, exploding yourself on a public bus or maybe an airplane. Just a thought. We're just spitballing here, throwing it out there. You really want to be righteous with us. That's the kind of thing we would do. Meanwhile, a lot of people lionizing this guy as a hero, and they say, rest in power, man. Hey, Bushnell, thanks for taking one for the team. Rest in power, rest in power. Have you seen that? This whole rest in power thing, I hate that. I hate rest in power. Somebody dies. Rest in peace is actually a centuries old, millennia old, really Christian sentiment. That's why we used to put it on tombstones. We still do in some cases. We would say rest in peace for a Christian who died, hoping that they are at peace with the life they lived and that they're in they have saving grace from God, and so that they can reach their heavenly reward. Be at peace, rest in peace, knowing that you will have your heavenly reward. And I guess you can't say that about this guy, given the way he took himself out in the cause he was celebrating. So instead of rest in peace, which has now been appropriated by the left, they call it rest in power, right? Anybody who dies that had some sort of left-wing political agenda, it's rest in power. But here's the thing. Andy Bushnell, well, wait, what's his name? I'm sorry. It's not Andy Bushnell. Aaron Bushnell. Aaron Bushnell is not allowed to use rest in power. People celebrating Aaron Bushnell are not allowed to use rest in power because Aaron Bushnell made the mistake, as leftist as he is, as righteous as he is, as woke as he may be, he made the unforgivable mistake of being born a white man. And so here's Layla Magdalene, a black activist who says rest in power is for black people. Black people have asked time and time again not to use this outside of the community. And every single time you do, y'all can pay your respects without appropriating. You can't say rest in power because he's white. You see, even in death, the man who sets himself on fire for the cause is not woke enough. How do the pro-Hamas terrorist types react to this news?
It's tragic that Aaron felt like he had to make the sacrifice. And that is on President Biden.
Citizen of the United States, a member of the Air Force, came here and decided to, tell his side of it, say he's not complicit in the genocide, and he lit himself on fire.
He is a martyr just like the rest of the Palestinians. Your sacrifices will not be forgotten. Your bravery will not be forgotten. The people of Palestine, thank you.
We will honor all our martyrs. We will honor all our martyrs.
As a former member in the military, I'm feeling the same way that he feels inside, watching a genocide take place.
I am a Holocaust survivor, and it saddens me profoundly that a young man took his life to bring his message to the president.
He was an incredibly brave, deeply moral man who's trying to stir the conscience of our country. And I hope that millions of Americans stand with him now.
Yeah, they're having a candlelight vigil out in front of the Israeli embassy where this guy did this atrocious thing. And you'll see what they're doing. They're celebrating. They probably want to put up a statue celebrating what he did. This kind of lionization, this kind of celebration, this kind of tearful memorial of his actions. You know what that does? You know what that's going to do? It's going to bring on copycats. They want more of this. You know how terrorists always proclaim that they love death more than we love life. And you're seeing it right here before your very eyes, here in this country. How radical is the reaction to this thing? I mean, you already heard Hamas, the terror organization, celebrating them, but it actually gets even more extreme than that. And those protesters, they're doing a candlelight vigil at the place of his death. It gets even more radical than that. We've got a statement from the staff of President Joe Biden at the White House. That's right. This is a group called Administration Staff Ceasefire Now. These are people who work in the White House who are celebrating this guy for killing himself and setting himself on fire. And they're trying to use it as a cudgel to beat Biden across the head, because even though he's been pretty weak on this whole thing and is undermining Benjamin Netanyahu in the state of Israel trying to defend themselves. Apparently, Biden's not weak enough. He's got to go all the way and be just pro-Hamas, like Rashida Tlaib. We mourn the loss of Aaron Bushnell, an active duty member of the U.S. Air Force, who lit himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy in D.C. because he could no longer be complicit in genocide in Gaza. How are we complicit? How was the U.S. Air Force complicit? How was it? I don't care. So, but it's not genocide, by the way. Everything about that. These people should be fired. Anyone who puts out a morally incomprehensible, upside down, backwards, despicable statement like this, along with an image of the White House with a flag flown at half-staff. Oh, screw you. Anybody who participates in this should be immediately fired. They have no business working for the United States federal government. Although, I guess under this administration, with this president, with this vice president, with this secretary of state, and this national security advisor, I guess they fit in just fine. Won't dignify them with a statement either. Meanwhile, Mohammed El-Kurd, who is a writer who lives in Jerusalem and is an influencer ever since this attack, it's an important voice of the Palestinians who were living under occupation in Israel. He lamented on social media about the status of affairs right now for people like him. You can't protest peacefully. You can't boycott. You can't hunger strike. You can't hijack planes. I'm sorry, what? You can't hijack planes? He's lamenting the good old, remember back in the good old days when we could just hijack planes when we had a political problem? Damn TSA put a stop to that. Oh, but those were the days. Gather around, kids. Let me tell you about the good old days when we could just hijack a plane. And, well, here, we'll just show you a video. See, these are the Twin Towers. You can't block traffic. You can't throw Molotovs. Yeah, it is sad that we can't throw incendiary bottles full of lit gasoline at innocent people or their buildings or vehicles. You can't self-immolate. You can't heckle politicians. Maybe he needs to put these in a different order. Usually you want to escalate up to the most intense thing. I'm thinking you can't heckle politicians. You can't march. Should be somewhere lower on the scale compared to throwing Molotov cocktails, self-immolating, and hijacking planes. You moral idiot. You can't riot. You can't dissent. You just can't be. But I just want to take this opportunity to remind you that it's this Justice Department and this FBI who thinks you're the domestic terrorist because, maybe you go to Latin Mass or speak up at a school board meeting. But this guy, he's not on anybody's radar. And neither was Aaron Bushnell, of course, who was right there in the military, but somehow slipped through the cracks. Cornel West, who's never seen a left-wing political dissident and wannabe terrorist that he didn't embrace and love, he held Aaron Bushnell up as a hero as well. Let us never forget the extraordinary courage and commitment of brother Aaron Bushnell, who died for truth and justice. I pray for his precious loved ones. Let us rededicate ourselves to genuine solidarity with Palestinians undergoing genocidal attacks in real time. We are seeing a jihadist mentality take hold in the American culture, in Western civilization. Cornel West is a professor at Princeton University, and he is embracing a jihadist terrorist suicide. Time magazine took it one step further to lie about this guy. But instead of just lying about him, our friend Mary Margaret Olahan over there at Daily Signal points out that they're sort of minimizing the whole idea of self-immolation by being a little morally confused themselves. Look at this article, this sentence in the article about Bushnell's death. Self-immolation was also seen as a sacrificial act committed by Christian devotees who chose to be burned alive when they were being persecuted for their religion by Roman Emperor Diocletian around 300 AD. They chose to be burned alive. I mean, I guess technically they did. The choice was, do you want to be burned alive or do you want to be ripped apart limb by a lion? Or maybe crucified upside down like St. Peter was. Trust me, they would have preferred not to die at all. And they weren't burned alive at their own hand to make a statement. They were burned alive, as you say yourself, Time Magazine, by the Roman emperor because they were Christian. This person could be living and walking around and fulfilling his service as an Air Force airman right now today. He chose to burn himself alive for your righteous left-wing woke cause. Seriously, what is wrong with these people? And to sully the memory of Christian martyrs who were killed for daring to believe in Jesus Christ as the Messiah and not becoming an apostate, not, throwing away their real belief and pretending to be a pagan, as they were compelled to do by the Roman government, to equate that with what this guy did. Somebody at Time Magazine must actually understand the English language. When you're burned to death by the state, that's not self-immolation. But I guess right now we're witnessing the self-immolation of Time Magazine. So I guess it all fits in together. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, down in Richmond, they are currently in a legislative session. And like most legislative U.S. Senate, like most state senates, the presiding officer, the president of the Senate, is the lieutenant governor. Just like in the United States Senate, the presiding officer, the president of the U.S. Senate, is the vice president. In fact, it's the literally only constitutional duty of the vice president of the United States. And for that matter, for most states, it's the only constitutional duty of the lieutenant governor. Now, in Virginia, that lieutenant governor is conservative Republican, former Marine. Oh, I'm sorry, retired Marine. No such thing as a former Marine, O'Connor. Lieutenant General Winsome Sears. And she was presiding over the Senate yesterday when one of the U.S. state senators, Danica Rome, asked a procedural question about a vote they were about to undergo and how many votes they needed to get an amendment passed. Pretty basic, down in the weeds, legislative, arcane stuff, right? But then something happened. Watch.
The senator may state it. Madam President, how many votes would it take to pass this bill with the emergency clause? That would be 4/5, Senator. And what would be the exact number for that, Madam President? Yes, sir. That would be 32. The question is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor of that motion will record their votes aye. Those
Now, do you see what happened there? That state senator, Danica Rome, then threw what can only be called a hissy fit and marched out of the Senate chamber there. Why, you may ask? Because Winsome Sears said, yes, sir. Now, it's interesting here because I say yes, sir, all the time. A lot of people say yes, sir, whether they're addressing a woman or a man, right? You just sort of use that phrase here. But it was interpreted by Danica Rome that Winsome Sears was referring directly to the senator as a sir. And oh, by the way, Danica Rome is, genetically and biologically a sir, but as you may have saw there, based on the name Danica instead of Daniel, and based on the appearance, I suppose you could be fooled into thinking that Danica Rome is not a sir and is in fact a madam. And well, as you saw, Danica Rome wasn't taking any of it, storming out of the Senate chamber. Let's watch how this transpires now.
opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators? I am not here.
All right, now let me pick this up in a moment because they ended up having to go to recess because of this horrific misgendering that Winsome Sears was responsible for. And everybody's meeting and yelling, and Danica Roem's trying to create a big deal out of this because this is what Danica Roem does. I know this. I've been following Danica Roem's career in Northern Virginia since the very first election. And the second that they can create a giant public event based on transgender rights, Danica Roem will be there. And that's what happened here. So Winsome Sears was called to apologize. And here's what that apology looked like.
I am not here to upset anyone. I am here to do the job that the people of Virginia have called me to do. And that is to treat everyone with respect and dignity. I myself have at times not been afforded that same respect and dignity. But in this body, and as long as I am president of the Senate, and by the grace of God, I will be treated with respect and dignity, and I will treat everyone else with respect and dignity.
Now, people didn't like that she didn't bend the knee, that she wasn't contrite enough, that she didn't beg for forgiveness for calling Danica Roem sir, or using the word sir when addressing Danica Roem. And instead, you saw a defiant Winsome Sears saying, you know what, I've had a lot worse said about me, and I assure you she has. I've seen it. They hate Winsome Sears. She is a Black woman, an immigrant from Jamaica, whose father came here with like $1.50 in his pocket. She is a retired Marine who loves her guns and protects the Second Amendment, loves unborn babies, and has no time for any of this. And let me tell you something. The liberals, the left, Democrats, the media in the Washington, D.C. area, they slime her. They call you know how she's treated. You know how any Black conservative is treated, let alone a Black woman conservative. So she said, give me a break. Man up, she said. So Democrat politicians all over Virginia decided that this was their moment. This is their Waterloo. This is their time to end Winsome Sears' career. Dan Helmer, Virginia. This is disgusting. Danica is one of the best public servants in Virginia, and Winsome Sears should grow up and show the senator the respect she deserves. Let me tell you something about Danica Roem. Danica Roem has run for the House of Delegates and is brand new to the Senate. Danica Roem has only been there for about a month, so maybe Winsome Sears was, surprised and confused based on Danica Roem's appearance. But let me tell you, every single time Danica Roem runs for office in Virginia, she collects something like 90 or 95% of the campaign funds for the Roem campaign from outside Virginia, from California mostly. Danica Roem is constantly in California for fundraisers from LGBTQ plus activists to bring back to Virginia to run for office. Let me ask something, Dan Helmer, Virginia. If Danica Roem is one of the best public servants in Virginia, then how come Danica Roem doesn't raise her campaign money from all of those grateful constituents in Virginia? Good question. But that didn't stop other Virginia Democrats from jumping on board. This is disgusting and inexcusable behavior, especially from an elected official, says Zach Lincoln. Mayor LeVar Stoney, I believe that's Alexandria, Fairfax, Northern Virginia. Winsome's comments on Danica Roem are abhorrent. What do you mean, winsome? You call her Lieutenant Governor Sears, or maybe ma'am. Mayor of Richmond, thank you very much. Her refusals to backtrack fail to represent true Virginia values. This must be denounced uniformly and unequivocally. True Virginia values? I'm pretty sure George Washington would agree with Winsome Sears here. Winsome Sears doesn't owe these people anything. You want to know who Winsome Sears is? Let me just explain one more time. Winsome Sears is the first woman elected as lieutenant governor. She is the first Black person elected as lieutenant governor of Virginia. So obviously, she is also the first Black woman elected lieutenant governor of Virginia. And it's a one-term situation. So in a year, Glenn Youngkin will be termed out, and Winsome Sears is next in line. She will be the presumptive nominee for Republicans, and Republicans love her. In fact, I will tell you this. When Glenn Youngkin was running for governor, and people were not so sure about this guy because he was a businessman, sort of put off a Romney vibe, not so sure. How conservative is he? Winsome Sears brought it. I know people who voted for Glenn Youngkin in that election because they wanted Winsome Sears as lieutenant governor. She is adored, and that's why they hate her. If she were a Democrat, she would be on national news all the time. She'd be on the covers of magazines. She would be celebrated. Are you kidding me? A Black woman immigrant Marine who's now lieutenant governor of a former Confederate state. Are you kidding me? But Winsome Sears is actually a lot more than that. She's not just about the labels you can put on her. And she doesn't have to pretend to be a heroic woman. She just is. Here's who Winsome Sears is.
Hello, Virginia. I'm Winsome Sears, running for Lieutenant Governor, and I'm taking a little bit of a break. Today is very important. It is August 11th. Now, that's when my father came to America, but this was back in 1963 so that he could get a second chance at life. And then he came and got me 5 years later, and this was after he had gotten his education, because he only came with $1.75 and took any job he could find, and then he put himself through school. And then came and got me, and now here I am making my way in America. And I was naturalized in October of 1984. And I've got to tell you, America may not be what she's supposed to be, but she ain't what she used to be. And we want to make sure that education pulled my father out of poverty, and it will pull everybody else out of poverty. And that's why I want to make sure that our children have a good education. We'll see you in November. Let's get a different start. Let's give each of our children opportunities. Thank you.
And it was that kind of message that won her the election. And I do love the fact that she's just hosing down those black-eyed Susan while she's talking to you. She's just a normal mom. And boy, do they hate her. So that's who Winsome Sears is. Also, this is who Winsome Sears is.
Let me ask you a question. Why are we breaking glass ceilings as women if we're only going to rebuild them? What am I talking about? Well, we had a bill today in our House, the House of Delegates, HB 1229. And this was to say that we've got to have fairness for our young girls, for our daughters, especially when it comes to sports. They have to be able to compete on a fair playing field. They're not going to have scholarships. They're running, if there's a biological male, they're running for second and third place, and in some cases, third place. So please get involved. Please call your legislators, your senators, your delegates, and let them know that you're not happy. Let them know that you're looking. Let them know you have not given up your rights as parents, and that we also have to protect our girl children.
I'm seeing a pattern here, a pattern of behavior that perhaps we should analyze for a moment and determine exactly how these things are supposed to go down. Let's first remind you who started all of this and who actually caused the firestorm yesterday in Richmond. So here is Danica Roem. And I don't know where you stand on assigning people their pronouns or letting them call themselves whatever name they want to call them. Listen, this person has legally changed their name to Danica, so this person's name is Danica. But this is, objectively speaking, fact-based as we can be here. Here's the truth. This is a man who is dressed up as and presenting himself to the world as a woman. Okay? Who is angry that a woman has not acquiesced and called him a woman. And now let's look again at the people who are most upset about this. Dan Helmer is also a man, a politician in Virginia. Ditto Zach Lincoln, also a man who's really upset that Winsome Sears, a woman, won't call Danica Rome a woman. Also, the mayor of Richmond, LeVar Stoney, a man. He is also absolutely indignant that Winsome Sears, a woman, won't call Danica Rome a woman. These are new times that we're living in. Everyone has very strong feelings about this. I'm reaching a point here where I think that there's one basic fundamental understanding that maybe we can all get behind. And that is, men don't have any right in any way whatsoever to get in the face of a woman and tell them that they have to accept a man dressed as a woman as an equal woman. Can we just agree on that? Who in the hell are these people to go up to Winsome Sears, a absolute groundbreaking woman in public life who has done something that no woman has ever done before? Who in the hell are they to go up to her and say, you're abhorrent, you're disgusting, you're despicable, because this guy who, 6-7 years ago decided he was going to be a woman, he needs to be called woman. And if you don't do it, you're the problem. Who in the hell are they? Winsome Sears, and frankly, every single woman in this country, on this planet. They have the right to determine for themselves who they're going to afford that dignity to. Every woman should be able to withhold for themselves, based on their own judgment and based on their own self-respect and their own value system, the honor of calling another individual a woman. I think they've earned it. Don't you? And finally, Joe Biden decided that he needed to get in front of this whole storyline out there that in some way he's too old or mentally incapacitated to be able to function as president, even though a U.S. attorney has actually submitted legal documents in a court of law saying that he can't even defend himself in court, let alone, have access to the nuclear codes. So he has to come up with ways to prove to the American people just how fit for office he is. So here's the latest. He appeared on a late night show. That's right. The first sentence in the article promoting the fact that he's showing up on Seth Meyers' show, President Biden is staying up late, making an appearance on Late Night as the NBC show marks its 10th anniversary with Seth Meyers in the hosting chair. And of course, yes, the show is on at 12:30, which is way past his bedtime. But as Jay Caruso points out, they record the show at 4 p.m. So he ain't really staying up late there, is he, guys? So it was 4 o'clock, and maybe they gave him an extra little booster shot, little cocktail of energy and B12. So he probably was at his finest, right? All right, let's have a gander. Here he is writing a joke that was written for him probably by Seth Meyers' writing staff.
How do you address that concern going forward as you come up to the 2024 election?
You got to take a look at the other guy. He's about as old as I am, but he can't remember his wife's name.
Yeah. How do you address that?
All right. So there's the big joke. He was asked, how do you address the age concern? He says, look at the other guy. He can't even remember his wife's name, which got a laugh, right? Because I'm sure you saw this story floating around that Donald Trump mistook his wife and called her by the name Mercedes instead of Melania. You won't be surprised to learn that that is a lie. It didn't happen. So we know it's a lie, of course, because Joe Biden just repeated it. So it has to be a lie. But I was there at CPAC this weekend, and here's what you need to know. Matt Schlapp is the chairman of the American Conservative Union. He runs CPAC. You've probably seen him on television quite a bit. He's kind of a famous individual. His wife is Mercedes Schlapp. She's actually a dear friend of mine and co-hosts my morning show one day a week here in Washington, D.C. Everybody knows Mercedes Schlapp. Anyone with a brain and follows politics knows, because Mercedes Schlapp actually used to work in the Trump White House in the communications department, worked on the Trump campaign, has done a ton of media appearances. And so here he was at the CPAC conference, and this is what happened.
My wife, our great first lady, she was a great friend. People loved her. Yeah, people love her. Oh, look at that. Wow. Mercedes, that's pretty good.
So he gets a standing ovation for mentioning his wife, and he's reacting to the crowd standing up, and he turns to his friend who used to work for him, who is married to the man who's running the CPAC conference, and says, Mercedes, this is pretty good. And the deceitful, let's just call them uneducated or uninformed reporters seized on that and said, he just called his wife Melania Mercedes. No, his wife wasn't even there. He wasn't referring to his wife. He was referring to Mercedes Schlapp, who was there for CPAC. And so what happens? Here's Joe Biden with his big zinger about Joe Biden's age on Seth Meyers.
How do you address that concern going forward as you come up to the 2024 election?
You got to take a look at the other guy. He's about as old as I am, but he can't remember his wife's name.
Yeah.
They're just despicable. They're just despicable, and they're always lying to you. Remember that. Everything they're saying is a lie. All right. And not to mention the fact that who's the one who can't remember his wife's name?
Hello. It's a good night. It's a good night. And it seems to be getting even better. They don't call Super Tuesday for nothing. By the way, this is my little sister, Valerie, and I'm Jill's husband. Oh, no, you switched on me. This is my wife. This is my sister.
Yeah, there's only one politician in this conversation who has literally confused his wife for his sister. Although based on some of the things we're learning about the Biden family, I don't want to go there. Also, by the way, as usual, what a contrast. That was 4 years ago. And look at that Joe Biden compared to this Joe Biden.
But I think everything we've gotten done, he's just friendly stated he wants to do away with if he gets elected. And I really think his views on where to take America are older than, anyway.
You know, if your one job here on this late night television appearance with Seth Meyers, a pretty friendly territory, by the way, is to convey to the American people that your brain is just fine and you're operating at the highest possible level and there's nothing to worry about. Maybe it's a little disconcerting that in your, 7 minutes on stage, you completely lose your train of thought and can't answer a simple question, a question that you probably knew was coming, because your advanced team probably didn't even allow you to do this unless you cleared all of the questions with Seth Meyers' people in the first place. So make your point here, Mr. President. Say it again.
But I think everything we've gotten done, he's just friendly stated he wants to do away with if he gets elected. And I really think his views on where to take America are older than, anyway.
Feel better now, America? Feel better? Glad he did this appearance, huh? Oh, there's more. How's your 2020 agenda going to look different? Excuse me, how's your 2024 agenda going to look different than 2020 is the question.
What's your 2024 agenda? Because I feel like we live in such crazy times that is one of the things I feel we hear less about.
Look, the 2020 agenda is to finish the job.
There you go. Finish the job. So he's only halfway done. Everything that has happened in the last 3+ years under Joe Biden, he's going to really bring it home 4 years from now. Honestly, Trump should just run these clips for their own ad campaign. The late night comedy shows used to be comedy shows, and instead they've allowed themselves to become propaganda platforms for Joe Biden and anyone else on the left. If they really cared about comedy, then maybe they'd do a little bit of what this Italian show is doing with regard to Joe Biden and how they perceive the American president.
Buonasera, Presidente Biden. Oh, Presidente Biden. President, Mr. President. It's okay. Ok, tutto a posto. Welcome, benvenuto. No, di nuovo, mamma mia. Mr. President, ecco.
Yeah.
Ok, it's okay.
Yeah, very good.
Si sente bene?
Yeah.
Sì. Sì.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, America is back, baby. America is back. By the way, you got to love Italian television. Look at how all the guys playing Secret Service men are like, freaking supermodels. Just walked off a photo shoot for Giorgio Armani or mafiosos. I'm not sure. Some stereotypes are there for a reason. In the meantime, the real life Joe Biden wasn't much different than that. He did a photo op with Seth Meyers there at an ice cream shop, as our friend Clay Travis, who runs Outkick.com, pointed out on X. There's something really weird about a guy, an old man, an adult, who goes out and gets himself ice cream alone without, it's not, he's got, well, not alone, right? He's got Seth Meyers, but he's not, there's no kids, there's no wife, who does that? Hey guys, let's go get some ice cream. Okay. Awkward. I know this has become a signature thing for him. You know that Biden, he loves his ice cream. No, I think it's a way for him to look, they think, more appealing, warmer, a little more inviting, but it just looks creepy. Look at him. Look at him. And then he talks with his mouth full. And it's a way to distract reporters, I guess. This, by the way, Karine Jean-Pierre, they'll complain to her about the fact that he never gives press conferences, and she'll point to this. What do you want? You were able to shout a question at him while he got an ice cream cone. You're welcome. And the White House press corps will be like, you're right. Thank you. We're sorry. So he's asked about the fact that this Thursday he's going to the border, for the first time since ever. And at the same time, Donald Trump will be there.
I've been planning to go Thursday. What I didn't know is my good friend apparently is gone.
And will you meet with migrants while you're there, Mr. President?
Well, I'm not going to announce ahead of time. Secret Service doesn't like me announcing exactly what I'm doing.
So once again, let me reiterate that the entire purpose of this visit to New York and to appear on Late Night with Seth Meyers was to once again reinforce and establish to the American people that the president is completely cognizant, completely capable, and totally in control of his surroundings, the issues at hand, and whatever might come his way as the commander-in-chief and the head of the executive branch of the United States government, the leader of the free world. That's what this whole thing was about. And we showed you the highlights there of his appearance. And, well, just to reiterate, here's what he looks like. Yeah, he's doing great. We're doing great. November can't come soon enough. That is it for today, and it was a loaded day. Thanks for sticking with us. If you watched us live on Rumble, tell a friend. Our subscriptions are already starting to grow and explode, and we appreciate that. We started literally with nothing a couple of weeks ago, and we're really killing it. So thank you. We're grateful to you. If you're watching us after the fact, either on Rumble or, that other platform, please like, share, subscribe, tell a friend about what we're doing here, and we will see you next time. My name is Larry O'Connor. You can call me Larry.